The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Huge show today. Big correction from yesterday, or medium size, small correction, call it what you will. When we were talking about the Albuquerque police officers who are now going to be tried in the killing of that homeless man, we said that it was a federal prosecution. It is not. It was indeed the Albuquerque prosecutor that has decided to bring these charges. Let's talk a little bit about the latest developments with the Paris massacre at the Charlie Hebdo satirical magazine offices, as well as at the kosher market. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has now taken credit for this attack, claiming responsibility for the rampage that left 12 people dead at the Charlie Hebdo offices. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula claiming that the attack was years in the making. They put out a video saying that Anwar al-Awlaki was the mastermind behind this attack. The US-born Muslim scholar and cleric was spokesman for AQAP before his death in 2011. The group did not claim responsibility for the deadly siege at a grocery store, the kosher market in Paris, but they did praise it. Quote here from the U.S. National Security Council about the authenticity of the video, quote, "The intelligence community is working as quickly as possible. If genuine, this is only the latest example of the wanton brutality that is Al-Qaeda's calling card and which it has visited upon innocents of all faiths." The new issue of the Charlie Hebdo magazine has vanished from kiosks almost immediately this morning in Paris. One newsstand near the Champs-Élysées opened at 6 a.m. and sold out within 5 minutes. Another near Saint-Lazare reported fisticuffs among customers, Lewis, people fighting over issues of the latest magazine. And as we said, they had obtained funding to print 3 million copies compared to the typical 60,000 that they normally print. And this, I think, is a good opportunity to clarify my comments yesterday. Some people emailed me yesterday after we talked about this new episode, this new issue of the magazine with Muhammad on the cover, and said, David, you are cowering in fear by not supporting the publication of another cover with Muhammad on it. And I want to go completely on record here, Lewis. I am absolutely supportive of this particular cover. I'm supportive of continuing to publish drawings of Muhammad and any other religious figures. Period. I mean, I don't know how else to explain that. I merely stated yesterday that I was hoping that the publication of this cover would not bring more strife to the employees of Charlie Hebdo, as they have suffered enough recently. That was it. I am absolutely in favor of this, and this is how you show these terrorists that they're not going to silence people who are going to draw Muhammad with these attacks. Maybe I wasn't clear enough about that yesterday.
I guess not, but we now have clarity. It's interesting to me that they described this attack as years of planning. If this attack took years of planning, you have to question their professionalism.
I thought the same thing, in the sense that something about saying this particular attack took years of planning sounded odd to me. And all we can do is state what we know, and that is that AQAP has claimed responsibility, and that U.S. intelligence officials are evaluating whether that claim of responsibility is to be trusted. And if we have more data, we'll present it. But I admit, Lewis, I had some of the same skeptical reaction you had.
It is a little bit strange, but maybe they're just claiming responsibility because no one else had. I'm not really sure.
Let's talk about Reza Aslan. Reza Aslan has now commented in an interview with Don Lemon on CNN about what he thinks caused the Paris massacre involving the Charlie Hebdo satirical magazine offices and a kosher market. And as people who have been watching this program for some time know, we have evaluated what Reza Aslan has said case by case, and sometimes he doesn't make a lot of sense to us. In his recent criticism of that exchange on the Bill Maher program involving Sam Harris and Ben Affleck and Bill Maher, we simply disagreed with what Reza Aslan has said in about that incident. And we made very clear that we thought that his Islam apologetics were actually bordering on dangerous in some ways. We now have yet another instance where I simply am not understanding what it is that Aslan is trying to prove with his interviews. Let's go to the video. Don Lemon asked Reza Aslan about the causes of these murders in France, and Aslan begins by saying the following. Let's listen.
Talk about that.
Yeah, Europe is facing nothing short of an identity crisis. I mean, look, the fact of the matter is that there have been these seismic changes on the continent, culturally, racially, religiously, politically, and that's resulted in this intense anti-immigrant and more specifically anti-Muslim backlash. I mean, in France, one of the largest parties, the party of Marine Le Pen, the National Front, is a virulently anti-Muslim party and very well may win the next elections. You have the UKIP party in the UK, the Pegida in Germany. This is a party whose sole platform seems to be let's get rid of all Muslims, and they have had for the last few months every week thousands and thousands of supporters marching in Germany.
Okay. Then he goes further and he says that what we really have to consider here is that France does not tolerate multiculturalism. Let's take a look at that.
I want you, because you said in no way are you saying that violence is ever right in this particular situation. You're explaining
Never.
the conditions that precipitated this.
There's a civil war taking place in Europe. The Europeans don't know who they are anymore. They're fighting to figure out who they are. They're looking around. The place doesn't look like it did 50 years ago. There are black faces and brown faces and Asian people. And particularly in France, an aggressively secularizing country that has never really tolerated multiculturalism or the kind of cultural religious diversity that is the hallmark of the United States. You could see how that would create the kinds of tensions that would bubble up occasionally into acts of violence on both sides. We've seen a lot of anti-Muslim violence in Europe as well as Muslim violence against Europeans.
So at the immediate reaction I had, first immediate reaction, Lewis, is wait a second. Reza Aslan is again avoiding an actual direct indictment of the murderers in this French terror incident. Now, it is not Reza Aslan's responsibility to go around condemning or indicting violent acts. But if you are going to choose, right, nobody forced him to go on CNN. He goes on CNN. He talks about all of the underlying context and explanations and factors that may have led to Muslims being angry with the Charlie Hebdo magazine. If you were going to do that, any reasonable person should want to clear up that the primary people to blame here, though, are not those pushing multiculturalism. It is the people who chose to go and murder, and I just didn't hear that from him, Lewis.
It's similar to the last time we talked about Reza Aslan, is it not? At that point, he was saying that he could not hold a religion or an ideology responsible for the atrocities that were being discussed. He said it was instead a problem of those countries. And I think the problem here is that he just cannot address or is unwilling to address that radical Islam is to blame here. Now,
he does kind of dance around this. He gets a little close when he says there is never a justification for violence. And Don Lemon almost had to, Don Lemon prompted him to say that. And Reza Aslan agreed and said, of course, there is never a justification for violence. But a justification is also different than saying, causation, right? You could still believe that while violence is never justified, that multiculturalism and anti-Muslim sentiment, et cetera, in France was the cause of these murders. And I just don't understand why Reza Aslan is not being more direct here. And the truth here is that, okay, we all have, all reasonable progressives, including our program, have made clear that there is unquestionable and unacceptable bias against Muslims. There are double standards that are applied to coverage of Muslim acts of violence that are not applied to non-Muslim acts of violence. We're very, very well acquainted with that. Mosques have been burned. Reza Aslan was right about that. Muslims have been attacked merely for being Muslims. Absolutely spot on about that. However, particularly now that Al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula has taken responsibility for these attacks. The specific reasons for these attacks seem to be that Charlie Hebdo was publishing cartoons and drawings of Muhammad, that Charlie Hebdo was perceived to be particularly Islamophobic, in spite of the fact that my review of their publishing history does not prove that, and Al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula has a known hatred of the West and of what we consider kind of like a Western democracy. So how can Reza Aslan, a presumed scholar, go on CNN and give every mention every other causal factor in these attacks except for the most obvious ones?
There are billions of people Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula want to kill. I'm sure they would like to blow up the entire United States and countless European countries as well, maybe all of those European countries. Charlie Hebdo just kind of painted a big target on themselves and stood out a little bit because of these cartoons. I think that's really what was happening here. I don't think we can say that it's just France's complete inability to tolerate multiculturalism and anti-Muslim sentiment that was the reason for this.
I want to comment briefly about the conservatives who have been asking me why I'm not talking about President Obama's notable absence from the rally in Paris after the Charlie Hebdo and kosher market attacks. And I want to comment on it to point out that there is just a hilarious, absolutely hilarious double standard being applied here. Conservatives who are criticizing the Obama administration because they aren't standing with France strongly enough are the same conservatives who were saying we should boycott France and call them freedom fries, not French fries, and call it freedom toast, not French toast. And Dana Milbank in the Washington Post says it perfectly. Quote, "A decade ago, Republicans in Congress were renaming French fries freedom fries and French toast freedom toast because of the country's refusal to support the Iraq war. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld belittled the, quote, old Europe French. George W. Bush mocked an American reporter for speaking French to the French president, and conservative critics called the French weasels, appeasers, and worse. Remember, John Kerry, the 2004 Democratic presidential nominee, was ridiculed by the Bush administration and by Republicans for being too French, looking French, speaking French. This was all a liability in the campaign." And now, the very same Monsieur Kerry, the Secretary of State, and his boss, President Obama, are being condemned by conservatives for not being nice enough to the French. How absurd, Lewis. Don't Republicans see the obvious transparency here in their attempt to attack Obama?
I think maybe they think there's a difference between being nice to other countries, being nice to those people who live there, and speaking French and eating foie gras. I don't know. Maybe there's a difference. Maybe we're missing it. We're
missing the key explanation. There's some minor detail that tells us why this glaring double standard hypocrisy is actually just an example of Republican consistency on all issues political. Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm suggesting it, although I can't say with certitude that that's what's happening here.
Yeah. So if you've been conservatives waiting for my comment on Obama not being there, that's my comment on Obama not being there. Let's take a break. We have Hatriot Mail next and the conclusion to our interview with former Scientologist Claire Headley.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program is funded directly by our audience through the David Pakman Show membership program. Today's new member of the day is Jason Boddock. Jason Boddock, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Jason gets access to the bonus show, to the commercial-free podcast feed that includes the bonus show, to audio and video of the television program and bonus show. And Jason is, of course, invited to next week's members-only town hall. This is like a private video conference with Lewis and with me, where members can ask us any questions they want, political, about the show, whatever. davidpakman.com/membership to sign up today and get yourself invited to next week's member town hall. Let's get right into Hatriot Mail, Lewis.
The right of the people to keep and bear hate shall not be infringed. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
I'm calling today's Hatriot Mail the $100 bills edition of Hatriot Mail. I think that's an apt name for it. Let's listen together.
You two pencil-necked pussies couldn't get laid in a whorehouse with a fistful of $100 bills.
Yeah.
You are so pathetically inept that you could fall into a barrel full of breasts and come out sucking your thumbs.
Lewis, is this something that has ever happened to you, that you fell into a barrel full of breasts?
No, not even close. It doesn't sound that bad, but no, it's never happened to me, actually.
And is your assessment that if you had a bundle of $100 bills and you went to a brothel, I'll use a term that's a little bit more polite, do you think you would be able to procure sexual activity?
I think I would. I'm quite confident that I would.
Yeah,
yes.
I don't know why if I showed up with hundreds, I'd be unable to do that. I don't understand really the logic of this Hatriot Mail.
It's lost on me, but it's entertaining nevertheless.
No question about it. There is Hatriot Mail. Next is the conclusion to our interview with former Scientologist. I should be clear about that. Claire Headley. We have your voicemail coming up after that. And I know it might seem early because it's January of 2015, but 2016 is starting to ramp up. I have news from Mitt Romney. I have news from Christie. I have news from Rand Paul and many others. That is after the conclusion to our interview with Claire Headley. Make sure to follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We're still speaking with Claire Headley, born into Scientology, worked at Scientology headquarters at the Sea Organization, member for 15 years, escaped in 2005. Before we talk about your escape, Claire, in 2009, the Tampa Bay Times exposed that there was a record of Scientology, the Church of Scientology, forcing pregnant women to have abortions. And you've since come clean, and this is just incredible, and said that you were forced into 2 abortions by the Church of Scientology. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Talk to us about the circumstances of how that happens.
Well, the first time was, 1994. And I was 19 at the time. I'd been married to my husband, Mark, at that point for 2 going on 3 years. And I hadn't been getting paid. So therefore at the time, I wasn't able to afford birth control. I was certainly not planning on a pregnancy. However, I found out I was pregnant, and I was very well aware of the rules that, and also the practices that were in place at the time, that if a woman got pregnant at that property, then immediate pressure was exerted to ensure that the woman went through with an abortion, because children were not allowed. And it was deemed that if a woman got pregnant and refused an abortion, then it was essentially a statement of wanting to leave and depart that organization, which in conclusion was an indicator of crimes.
So talk to us about, I want to go, you said a few things there that I want to kind of go back to. When you say pressure is put on someone to have an abortion, how does that happen? Is it overt? Is it implicit?
It's all of those things. It starts as implicit, i.e., well, that you're pregnant and the next step is, the assumption is that you're now going to go through with an abortion. If you put up any kind of fight, then you're going to be removed from your position, put under full-time security watch, put on heavy manual labor, and then started on interrogation as to what quote-unquote crimes you've committed that's causing you to want to leave.
Now let's talk about the leaving part, because that's the other thing you said. Could you just leave at this point? Could you say, listen, I'm now pregnant, I'm interested in carrying this pregnancy to term, I'm leaving, and I'm just going to live my life outside of Scientology. Can you do that, or do they physically prevent you from doing that?
No, you cannot just leave. They'll argue that all you have to do is say you want to leave. But the reality is that you can't just leave. First of all, you have to understand that physically, the headquarters and the base where I was working is in the middle of the desert in Hemet, California. It's a 500-acre compound that's heavily guarded with motion sensors, cameras, fence with, razor barbed blades on the top of the fence. There's a 24/7 security watch with any person leaving the property and returning to the property is very closely tracked with lists by the security guards. If you're in any kind of trouble, you're restricted to the property and not allowed to go home any longer. There were extreme security measures in place. Not only that, but you have no unmonitored contact to the outside world. So any phone call is monitored, any correspondence is monitored. You don't have a car, you don't have a phone. So in reality, you're a prisoner, because really, if you decide you want to leave, you're completely at their whim as to whether or not they will let you leave. And by my observation, anyone who said they wanted to leave very rarely did.
And of course, this is all against the law, but you see that the few times that charges are brought against the Church of Scientology, they're typically dismissed. Is the fact that they are so controlling part of why there ends up being often what a court considers not enough evidence to proceed with charges? I mean, is that part of the explanation?
I absolutely think so. I just think that the reality of life at that base was so extreme that people on the outside who have never been or lived there or been in any kind of circumstance like that, honestly, I think they're way more comfortable to think, oh, that couldn't possibly be happening in this country. Right. It's just, the reality is people sometimes don't want to know that that's even possible in this country. But that's I think part of the enablement of how they're able to get away with that kind of thing. And also too, it's a well-known fact that Scientology has a very long history of being an extremely litigious organization. They have the art of using religious cloaking to their benefit down to a science. They just do. And, I'm sure that's what gives them a bad name with actual religions. But,
what has been the impact of, you said in 1994 initially, and then again subsequently, these two abortions that Scientology, the Church of Scientology, forced you to have? What's been the impact on your life of that?
Well, it was and is and remains a devastating life situation for me. From the day I arrived at that property and learned of that practice, I had promised to myself I would never put myself in that position. And, talk about feeling absolutely impossibly trapped. There's so many levels of dynamics of it as well. Specifically, if, for example, if I had put up a fight that first time, then I would have been separated from Mark, my husband, and there would be no guarantee. I would have no idea. They often feed lies and break up relationships as a result of that. It's a very common practice. I mean, I once made a list of all the people I knew who had divorced. It was a massive list. Just I knew more people that ended up divorced than who actually stayed married at that property. So of course, as a 19-year-old, I knew I would be shunned by my family. I'd probably lose my husband.
Yeah.
I would be put on heavy manual labor, which God only knows what harm that would cause to my baby. I mean, I absolutely felt irreversibly trapped. And, as much as I wanted to see a way out, I had none. And even after that first one, I swore to myself, if it ever happened again, then I would absolutely refuse, and I would, stay with Mark, and I made a whole list of resolutions that I absolutely would never be in that position ever again and let them do that to me. Well, the second time ended up as it happened that I was in Florida, separated from Mark. And when I found out I was pregnant the second time, I had to do what they call a CSW. It's completed staff work. You have to have written approval to make a phone call to anybody, even my husband. So I did that. I requested requested authorization to call my husband, and they refused. So I couldn't even, in that time, he wouldn't have even known that I was pregnant at all. I wasn't able to tell him until 8 months after the fact of the abortion. And, by this point, after I left, I saw a therapist and went through a number of things to address, the grief and pain and everything else that was associated with that. That's the other part of it. You can't even grieve the loss at the time because, quote unquote, that's against the rules there. So, it's really hard.
Incredible. Claire, we have just very limited time left, but if you could give us a sense of how you made this escape, where first Mark went first and you followed soon thereafter in 2005. How did you do it?
That was the hardest time in my life, for sure. I mean, Mark escaped. I had not been home in a week. I hadn't been sleeping. I'd been working around the clock 24/7. He had tried to tell me the night before he came to my office to talk to me, but I was not able to talk to him. He then radioed me at 4 o'clock in the morning asking if I was coming home. And I had told him I was going to try and come home, even just shower and change. That didn't end up happening. And so when he left, I was then informed that actually specifically what they told me was that he had blown, that's their word for an unauthorized escape, and that he had become an enemy of Scientology by virtue of the fact that he had called the police, which none of that was true to what happened. But that's what I was told, still being a member there at the time. And I, of course, was devastated. I mean, by that point, Mark and I had been married for 13 years. And to hear that my husband has become an enemy of Scientology was, a devastating blow on many levels.
Yeah.
Of course, I loved him, and I couldn't believe that what they were telling me was true. It was the catalytic moment where my house of cards fell apart of what was I even doing there and why was I staying there? My life had been miserable for several years leading up to that point. And really, when Mark left, just made me reevaluate what I was doing and made me realize that I needed to get out of there. So the trick was to then figure out how to get out of there. I was told that David Miscavige had ordered that Mark be captured and brought back. So the last thing I was going to do was escape when they were in the process of bringing him back. So that's why 3 weeks elapsed before I made a break for it. Also in the interim, I was put under very close scrutiny, security watch. I was assigned a buddy, all kinds of things. Anyway, the short version of the story is that I essentially made an eye doctor's appointment in Hemet. I was given a security escort to go to that eye doctor's appointment. And so then I had to break away from the security escort. I had called a cab early that morning under an assumed name, and I somehow managed to get into the cab away from my security escort and started on my path to reunite with Mark. Because of the fact that I had a phone that belonged to the organization, and I made the mistake of turning that on in the process of my escape, I was then intercepted in Las Vegas. There were at least 4 people that showed up there to bring me back.
Wow.
And yeah, and they called Mark and told him that I wasn't coming and that they'd caught me, and all kinds of things happened there. But anyway, long story short, I stuck it through and made it out and was reunited with Mark, and here I am today.
And when the 4 people showed up in Vegas, how did you evade them ultimately?
Well, I didn't evade them. What happened is I was on a Greyhound bus heading from California to Missouri. Mark was in Kansas City, Missouri with his father. And so during my journey, I'd called Mark from the phone. When the bus pulled into Vegas, it was 6 o'clock at night. It was dark outside. And I knew that I had a 40-minute layover, and I also had to change buses. So I had waited until everybody got off the bus. And then I thought, okay, well, I didn't see anybody, so I thought I would go and get a meal, since I hadn't eaten a meal in several days by that point. I got off the bus, and before I even made it into the terminal, I had my hand on the door to open it, and boom, there was Greg Wilhair was the main person who was there, and Sharon Johnston was another person, and then there were 2 other people waiting outside in a car to take me back. Anyhow, they said, oh, why don't you come? You're not going to do this. You're coming back with us. Let's go eat some food and sort this out. And I just refused to go with them. I knew there was a good chance that they could physically try to manhandle me. So I walked into the bus station, put my purse in the middle of the floor and sat on it. And I just hoped and prayed that if they did try to physically drag me out of there, and if I screamed, then somebody hopefully might see and call 911. I mean, I had so little interaction with the real world at that point that I had no clue what else to do.
Right.
You'd think that a simple solution would be to call 911, but when you're in Scientology, you're ingrained from day one. And for me, that was from, age 5, that government authorities, police, media, all of those people are against Scientology and are therefore very bad people. So you just simply don't think of those kind of simple everyday life solutions. But nonetheless, I sat on the floor of the Greyhound bus station and figured, well, I just need to wait out my time and make it onto that bus, and that's what I did.
What an incredible story. We've been speaking with Claire Headley, born into Scientology, worked at Scientology headquarters as a Sea Organization member for 15 years, and ultimately escaped in 2005. Claire, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story with us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We now have the details of a SWAT team that killed a man in a so-called drug raid, which ultimately turned up about $2 worth of marijuana. Jason Westcott had no criminal record to speak of, and he died in a SWAT drug raid, which yielded, as I mentioned, a tiny amount of marijuana. It started when a confidential informant lied to police about Westcott. The informant was approached by the Tampa Bay Times in July using the name Kugel, was a 50-year-old felon and a drug addict. And Kugel said that he was one of the primary informants for the Tampa Bay Police Department on drugs. And typically the way this happens is that the police find someone who is involved with drugs. They offer them somewhat of a deal if they can flip or start informing on who is buying drugs, who is selling drugs. The idea being that they can find somebody higher up in the chain of drug distribution. And Kugel says that he was regularly lying about suspects. He was stealing drugs, that he was using taxpayer money from police to buy drugs and then just keeping the drugs. And the SWAT team showed up at Jason Westcott's house. Jason Westcott, young man, no criminal convictions. And even though it was a lie that the informant Kugel told police, the SWAT team showed up. They found $2 worth of marijuana. But by the time they realized that that was all the weed there was, they had already killed Jason Westcott. Armed men dressed in black entered the home that Westcott shared with his boyfriend, Izzy Reyes, who was sleeping on the couch. One of them threw Reyes to the floor, shouting, "Police search warrant." Hearing all of this noise, Westcott, who would not anticipate a SWAT team serving a search warrant, was roused from his bed. Again, armed men dressed in black, the confusion of the middle of the night. Westcott had a legally owned pistol, which he grabbed and opened the bedroom door. Police immediately fired 5 rounds, killing him and ultimately finding 0.2 grams of marijuana, which was 99.99% less than what the informant Kugel said they would find at Jason Westcott's house. And sadly, Lewis, Westcott dead after a lie, and 0.2 grams of marijuana ultimately found. How about that war on drugs?
To me, even if they had found a pound of pot, this would still seem incredibly excessive.
Of course.
And yes, another perfect example of how the war on drugs is just a total failure and is just incredibly harmful.
What element of this, the informant, the SWAT team, what element of any of this can someone point to and say, David, we're all safer because this is the standard operating procedure around informants and drug raids and marijuana? Can anyone put together scraps of an argument that would explain to me how any element of this is a positive thing? I can't think of anything, Lewis.
I can't either, but perhaps it ended with a bit more money for the police department. Perhaps not. They might have a lawsuit on their hands now.
The 2016 election, I know it seems like it's far away, but the Republican primary side is really ramping up. A new Iowa poll has Mitt Romney, the failed 2012 Republican candidate, leading the field with 21% of the support. Jeb Bush, that is, at 14%. Scott Walker at 10%. Remember that numerous times Mitt Romney has said his career in presidential politics is over, that he will not be running again, that 2012 was it. I believe that his wife said the same thing. But as it turns out, Mitt Romney will be attending the Republican National Committee's meeting in San Diego, according to 3 sources who spoke to NBC News. He will be making his first public comment since the news surfaced a few days ago that he is indeed considering a 3rd presidential run. He has been reaching out to former staff members, to former donors, to former supporters. And according to an advisor close to Romney, quote, he's doing what he does well, and that's due diligence. Lewis, maybe Mitt Romney in it again?
I'm very, very excited about this. Do you remember all of the video clips, the sound bites and embarrassing moments from the last campaign.
Yeah, not being able to identify a chocolate donut, talking about a touch-tone keypad used for ordering a sandwich at Wawa's, betting Rick Perry $10,000 over some minor political disagreement. I can't even think of all of them, saying he's also unemployed.
The 47%.
Right.
It's incredible. And now we get to look forward to all of this again. He's going to have a whole nother go at it. I am very excited about this.
So that's Mitt Romney. Then we have New Jersey Republican Governor Christie. He could be setting up a political action committee before the end of this month to start helping raise money with the idea of maybe running for the Republican nomination for president in 2012. Unlikely we will hear anything official from Christie anytime soon. I think Christie has no shot. The rampant corruption, the rampant cronyism is a huge problem nationally. And then the fact that on some issues, Christie is a little more moderate is probably not going to help him within the Republican primary. I see Christie as a complete non-starter for 2016.
Agreed. I don't think he really stands a chance. But why not? Let's throw him in the mix just to mess things up.
And then Rand Paul, Republican senator from Kentucky and the son of Ron Paul, the former failed presidential candidate, is also going to New Hampshire and to Nevada this week. He's trying to maybe light a fire under some right-wing voters who want a new type of voice to carry the Republican message to the White House. I think that Rand Paul will not be the Republican nominee for president in 2016 for the Republican Party. I know it's only January. I know he hasn't even officially announced. But I believe that his possibility is also a non-starter. Much like his father, Ron Paul, Rand Paul seems to do well in these CPAC straw polls, which bring out the more libertarian wing of the Republican Party. But I think that Rand Paul is completely unviable in terms of the broader Republican primary base.
Agreed. I'm interested to see if he can develop and build the same cult-like following that his father did.
Hasn't he already, in a way?
I don't know. I feel like the Ron Paul, the Paul bots under Ron Paul were a bit more fervent, if you will, than those under Rand Paul. But we'll see. That can change.
Yeah, and there's no better credential than to be the libertarian candidate within the Republican primary than creating your own board for approving ophthalmologists, appointing your wife as the president of that organization, and then having that organization say you are indeed an ophthalmologist. I mean, it's just brilliant.
If only he could do that for the presidency,
right?
He'd be
Yeah.
all set.
If he could only appoint his wife in charge of the Republican primary system and have her determine that he will be the Republican candidate, it would be a pretty good thing for him.
I think he'd first have to become president, then set that up and become president for eternity.
We do have a voicemail number, 219-2-DAVID-P. You can call any time of day. Here's a voicemail we received. I'll play it for you.
Hey, David. My name is Lucia. I'm calling from New York. Anyway, it really didn't have entered my mind, but you brought it to my attention. How does Zimmerman get all these girlfriends? And I'm thinking, well, maybe they all make believe they're his girlfriends, and they're setting him up to show the public that he is a criminal. Anyway, that's what came into my mind, because you're right. I mean, he's not good looking. I mean, not for nothing. And he did commit a crime, even though he went free. So maybe that's what's happening. They're setting him up.
I love this call, Lewis, and somehow, while I love the call and everything about it, I'm having a hard time imagining that all of these girlfriends that George Zimmerman seems to be getting into legal trouble for hurting in some way, I don't know that it's a conspiracy to show how violent Zimmerman is. I think they're legitimately his girlfriends, and that's shocking to me.
Maybe they just really like guns. That could be it.
Yeah, they're turned on by his ammo fetish. He's an ammo-sexual, as we know. Yeah, I don't know, but very, very interesting voicemail. 219-2-DAVID-P. Call anytime. On today's bonus show, a despicable McDonald's commercial. A Jewish newspaper photoshops female world leaders out of the recent march in Paris. And is the Nigerian government protecting Boko Haram? We've considered this in the past, and we have new information for you on that. Access the bonus show by becoming a David Pakman Show member, davidpakman.com/membership. We will talk to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.